Welcome to Conversations from the Cave, a space where men come to be formed and realigned to God's original design. This is that place where men can come when the framework they've been handed stops working, when the performance gets tired, when the provision isn't enough, when the man on the outside doesn't match the man on the inside. I'm Powell, and this is your cave. This season, we go back to God's original design for you, not what the culture said about you, not what the church handed you, but what God actually said before the distortion accumulated, before religion reduced it, before culture replaced it. Season 1, Before the Distortion. This is episode 1. The cave is the point. Let's get into the first episode. If you're like most men, you do your best to show up, to produce, to provide, to protect. And even when you're successful in doing those things, oftentimes it still feels like something's missing. You check most, if not all, the boxes, yet it still feels like the situations, the circumstances, maybe even the people around you still want more. And you find yourself asking, am I ever enough? Is it ever going to be enough? And even though we may talk about these things to each other sometimes, we still can't really find the language that answers the question, if we're more than a provider and a protector, then what are we? You hear clips in the social media space and they provide tips that sound good, but yet they don't quite answer the question completely. It seems like there's always something else we need to do to be considered a real man. And if you're like me, you eventually find yourself tired, or maybe you just dismiss it as it is what it is. So you keep pushing through because that's just what you do as a man, as an adult. Because at the end of the day, as a man, you don't show weakness, right? I mean, you don't have time to feel because we know success doesn't live in your feelings. But even in the times you push through and you actually achieve the thing, there's that underlying feeling that something still doesn't add up. And you find yourself constantly looking for more, like a drug addict chasing the next high, trying to fill a void that the next achievement just couldn't fill. Now, this isn't about not having God, because even men who are faithful in their prayers, faithful in their worship, faithful in their church attendance, they still have these feelings of emptiness, these feelings of being unfulfilled. I'm saved. I'm sanctified, spirit-filled, and I'm in every word of that. And yet I found myself still tired, still exhausted, still feeling like nobody really understands, like nobody could really speak to that unfulfilled place and give me something I can carry with me that's solid. I'm sure you can relate to times that even after leaving church or a conversation with good friends, you have this feeling of being inspired only to land back into a space where you felt a deficit, like something wrong, and like something was still missing. I know what that feels like because I've been that man. I've been the guy who showed up, who worked hard, who provided and protected. I did everything I thought a man was supposed to do, only to feel empty, only to feel unfulfilled, only to feel like I was performing just to fit in. But through some study, through some real time in the text, I realized that many of the things I was building my life around, many of the beliefs I was using to navigate life were never really what God said. It was from a false framework we were handed from the culture and unfortunately, in many ways, from the church. So men built their identity and we created narratives rooted in things that are not solid. And I needed to find out what that solid thing actually was. And that's why I started this podcast, because I wanted to speak to those places that men feel day in and day out that go unexpressed because nobody seems to understand enough to name it and give a new framework. And I want to invite you into this conversation so you can begin to understand what I found looking through the scriptures, not based on what we've been taught in most church spaces about manhood and masculinity, but what God actually said that put me on a firm foundation I could stand on and on a restorative path to a God-given identity that couldn't be shaken, regardless of what life handed me. I believe it's what God's original intent was for the man and for the woman who would walk with him. Because this show is about restoring both of us to God's original design before distortion accumulated, before religion reduced it, and before the culture replaced it. And what I found gives language to the feeling you've been carrying, and it comes from a place that never depletes. It comes from a place that never runs out. I want to welcome you to Conversations from the Cave. I'm Powell, and I built this show because I needed it first. And I'm excited that you've joined me on this journey. Now, before I go any further, I want to show you something. I want to describe 3 men, and I believe you're going to see and recognize yourself in at least one of them, maybe even more than one. The first man, he's built something. He's got the career, the family, the reputation. He shows up, he stays faithful, and from the outside, everything looks right. But there's a hollowness underneath all of it that performance can't fill, and prayer alone hasn't explained. Now, he's not broken. He was just never told what he was actually built for. The second man, he's a believer, and he's believed for years. He's done the right things. He makes the sacrifices. He stays in the church when other men walk away. But somewhere between the sermons and the sacrifice, nobody gave him a framework that matched what he was feeling on the inside. He kept doing the right things, but he kept also feeling like something essential was missing. The third man, he's tired. Tired of shrinking into roles that were handed to him by the culture, by the church, by everybody's expectations. Now, this guy's not looking for another push, and he's not looking for a better strategy. What he's looking for is something real and something true. And it's not an issue of faith. It's an identity problem nobody's quite named. Now, they may not know it, but they're all looking for something that goes all the way back to the original design before everything else got layered on top of it. 3 different men, 1 cave. And if you're a woman listening, one of those men just walked through your mind, and you already know who it is. So stay with us, because this show is for all 3 of those men, and it's for you too, sis. Now, I know I just said cave, and some of you are thinking man cave. And you're like, man cave? That's where it's at, bro. I love my cave. You got the big screen, the recliner, the game. Nobody's bothering you. It's just you and your peace. So I get it. That's sacred space. And I'm not trying to take that away from you, because that cave serves a real purpose. Every man needs a space where he can decompress, process, and just be. But the cave I'm talking about is a different kind of cave. This cave is not the place you go to get away. It's that place when things are falling apart and you turn on yourself and you start questioning your manhood, or whether it's worth it to keep on living. Most people think of this cave the way the world taught them to. It's dark. It's isolated. It's somewhere where you end up when things go wrong. It's something to escape. And many men are living lives of quiet desperation because they're in that cave. And if that's where you are right now, I see you. The cave may not be seen, but it's real. The darkness is real. The isolation is real. And I want to offer you a different way of seeing it. Because this cave is just as sacred. Because this cave is not where your story ends. This cave is where your formation happens. Not the place you go to get away. It's the place you go to get built. Now, there's a man in Scripture who understood this better than almost anyone. His name was David. And at one of the lowest points of his life, where he was hunted, rejected, displaced, he ended up in a cave. The cave of Adullam. 1 Samuel chapter 22 tells us what happened next. It said men began to come to that cave, and everyone who was in distress, everyone who was in debt, everyone who was discontented gathered to meet him there. 3 kinds of men: distressed, indebted, discontented. Sound familiar? It was about 400 men, and David became their captain. He didn't manage them, and he didn't fix them. He didn't hand them a program and tell them to get it together. What he did was he let them into his story, and he led from who he was, not from a program. And those 400 broken, indebted, discontented men over time became the mighty men of David, the most formidable warriors in all of Israel. Now, the text doesn't say it happened overnight. Formation never does. But something happened in that cave season that changed what those men were at the level of identity. Not what they did, but what they were. They arrived distressed, but they left dangerous. The cave of Adullam was not where their story ended. It's where they were built. And that's what this show is. Men come to this cave on purpose, not because they have it together, but because they're ready to be formed. Now, I want to take you somewhere, not to a sermon or a theology lecture. I want to take you to something that landed for me like the answer to a question I didn't even know I was asking. This is Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 through 27. And it says, God said, "Let us make man in our image and according to our likeness." And we've heard that our whole lives. We're made in the image of God. But here's what most of us were never told. We were never told what those words actually mean. In the original Hebrew, the word translated image is tselem. T-S-L-E-M, tselem. To really understand it, let's look at the ancient Near Eastern world, where this text was written. Tselem was not a vague spiritual concept. It was a specific word for a specific thing. And here's the understanding. When a king conquered a territory that he could not personally occupy, he would erect a tselem, a physical image of himself, placed in that territory to declare his sovereign presence and authority. So you didn't need the king in the room because the tselem said, the king is here, his authority is here, and this territory belongs to him. Now read Genesis again with that in your ear. When God placed man in the earth, he didn't place a creature, he placed a living tselem, a royal representative in his image, his presence, his authority, deployed in the earth. And let me stop right here, because brother, I want you to know, that is what you are. Not what you produce, not what you perform, not what you protect or provide. See, it's been said that the first thing God gave man was work or responsibility. But that's inaccurate. The first thing God gave to man was an identity. A living representative of the King of the universe, placed here on purpose, with authority, with assignment, with a dignity that was given, not earned. And here's the most important thing I can say to you today, and I need you to hear me on this. There is absolutely nothing you could do that would change you from being made in the image of God. That is set in stone. It cannot be earned. It cannot be lost. It cannot be revoked through failure, through seasons of not getting it right, through years of feeling like you've been doing it all wrong. Genesis chapter 9, verse 6 confirms it, that even after the fall, even in a broken world, God still points to the image as the reason human life has weight. The tselem remains, bro. Now you may be thinking, I've heard this before, Bo. I've been told I'm a child of God since I was a boy. I know I'm made in the image of God. I've heard it 100 times, and I still feel the way I feel. So what's so different about this? That's a fair question, and here's the honest answer. The church told us to remember, but it typically attached the remembering to the results. Remember you're a child of God, so your business will prosper. Remember who you are, so your breakthrough will come. It made remembrance a tool, a faith strategy for better outcomes. And so we tried it. We remembered, we declared, we confessed. Let's be honest, the results didn't always come. And when they didn't, we didn't just feel like our circumstances were failing. We felt like our faith was failing, like we were failing. It was the same framework the culture handed him, production and performance, just wrapped up in Scripture. Now, I want to be clear about something. This isn't about dismissing provision and protection. Those are real responsibilities, my friend, but they were never designed to be the foundation of a man's identity. They are byproducts of an aligned man, not the definition of one. And my goal is to give you a much firmer foundation to stand on, and that foundation is about remembrance as the ground a man stands on before any outcome arrives. So it's not a tool, it's a foundation. And that distinction is everything. Now, there's a second word in that passage that I want you to really lean in on. Not only did the scripture say we were born in his image, but in his likeness as well. The word translated likeness is demut. D-E-M-U-T. Selem is what you are. That's given, it's permanent, that's set. But demut is how you function. It's about whether you're operating in a correspondence to the one whose image you carry. Think about it like this. A son bears his father's image from birth. He has the bone structure, the jawline. You look at him and you know whose son he is. That's Selem. But whether he grows into his father's character, his wisdom, his integrity, his way of carrying himself through life, that develops through relationship. That develops through formation. That's demut. You see, the image is permanent, but the function isn't. It's developed. And here's where the distortion happens. Because when a man is successful but empty, when he's faithful but unfulfilled, when he's shrinking to fit everyone's expectations, when he has everything he was told to chase and he still feels that ache, that's demut, misalignment. He's carrying the image, but he's not functioning from that image. In other words, he is the Selem, but he has forgotten who the image represents. Now understand, this isn't condemnation. It's a diagnosis. And there is a way back. So, how does a man get back to functioning from the image he already carries? That answer is also in the Hebrew. The word God used when he named what man is zakar. Z-A-K-A-R. Simply, zakar means male, the biological designation. But the Hebrew carries something much deeper. You see, zakar is both a noun and a verb. As a noun, it means male. As a verb, it means to remember with an intent to execute. In the Hebraic worldview, things are named by their nature and their function, not just their appearance. So when God names the male zakar, he is declaring what the man is by what he's designed to do. The name carries your design. And you were built to remember what God said about who you are, about your covenant, about your assignment, and then to execute from that place. And here's what I need you to hear about what zakar is not. Because the church got close, but missed the fullness of it. The version most of us were handed sounds just like this. When the enemy attacks your identity, remember what God said about you. So zakar has been framed as a counterpunch, a weapon you picked up under pressure. That's not wrong, but it's not the full picture. Zakar isn't a smoke detector that goes off when there's a threat. Zakar is the foundation of the house. It doesn't just activate when threatened. It's what the house is built on, whether there's a threat or not. It's the continuous posture a man lives from before anything goes wrong or right. That means your identity is not waiting on your outcomes to be true. Your identity is true before any outcome arrives. That's zakar. That's the design. That's what you were built for. Not better performance, but a better foundation. Now, I know you've heard you're a child of the king, that you're a king's kid. But that reference was usually given to us as a prescription and a premise tied to obtaining possessions, not maintaining a posture and purpose. And that's the distortion. Jesus said it like this: a good tree cannot bear bad fruit, and a bad tree cannot bear good fruit. So the nature of the tree determines the fruit, not the other way around. And then he said something else. He says, apart from me, you can do nothing. Meaning the source of the nature is the connection. Abiding, remaining, remembering. That's the sequence. Identity, connection, fruit, in that order. Always in that order. See, an apple tree doesn't produce apples to earn the right to be called an apple tree. It produces apples because that's what apple trees do. The fruit doesn't create the nature, it reveals it. So if you're not seeing the fruit you were designed to produce, the answer isn't to perform harder. It's to find out where the root got disconnected. You don't fix the fruit, you restore the foundation. And for most men, that foundation has been so misaligned for so long, it just feels normal. Now, I want to show you where this started, because this isn't just a modern problem. This distortion has a beginning, and when you see where it started, you'll understand why it runs so deep. Genesis chapter 3, the serpent enters the garden. And the man who had the assignment, who had the authority, who was standing right there, didn't execute. He didn't remember what God said. He didn't guard what was given. He allowed the distortion to stand. And what entered that garden was the lie that has followed every man ever since. The lie of, you are what you produce. You're only as valuable as your last harvest. You're the strong one, and strong ones don't need anything. And that lie has been running in the background of every man's life ever since that moment. And it found you before you had language for it and before you even knew to question it. The streets picked it up, the culture amplified it, and sometimes the church sanctified it. And somewhere along the line, the game changed. Things got flipped on its head, and now a man's value comes from what he has in his hand instead of what's in his heart. We equate fruit primarily with material possessions and how a man performs, with what he can show for himself. And it has driven many of our men to an early grave because he's bought the lie that his identity was in his productivity and not in his faithfulness to his God-given assignment. So instead of being judged according to his covenant nature, according to the king he represents, he's judged by his compensation and his conquest. Now, please don't misunderstand me. Yes, you're supposed to work hard and make money. Yes, you're supposed to be a leader, a good husband, a good father, a provider, and protector for the people God has placed in your life. Those things absolutely matter. But those things were never meant to be the foundation. They are byproducts of a zakar-aligned man. They are not what makes a man who he is. Your paper doesn't define you. Your possessions don't define you. Your performance doesn't define you. Your position does. And your ability to remember that position and stay faithful to the function of that position, that is what defines you, my friend. That way, when conditions change, when you lose the job, when your health declines, the business goes left, or when you're in a down season, you don't question your manhood, because your manhood wasn't built on any of those things. It was built on something solid that never changes, that doesn't crumble, that never depletes. And if anybody tries to define you by anything other than that, you have the right to reject that narrative. Not with anger, not with a chip on your shoulder, but with the quiet confidence of a man who knows what he's standing on. You don't have to argue for your worth, bro. And you don't have to prove anything to anyone. And here's what I found when you start functioning from who God actually said you are. The things that don't align will fall away on their own. You won't have to force it. You won't have to manage it. Because a man operating from his true identity naturally outgrows the frameworks that were too small for him. And that's not arrogance. That's alignment. It's not that your productivity needs to change. It's not that your work needs to change. It's not even that your output needs to change. It's your perspective. It's your paradigm. And when you come into alignment, you understand the assignment. And you find the solid foundation that everything else can be built on. Now, I have to be upfront with you. Walking in this identity carries more responsibility. Operating in correspondence to God's likeness isn't a lighter load. But here's the difference. You don't carry it alone, because God has promised to carry it with you. And that's not a motivational line. That's a covenant. Now, I want to come back to the three men I described at the beginning, and I want to speak directly to each of them. To the man who's successful but empty, that hollowness you feel is not ingratitude. It's not a sign that you're doing faith wrong. It's a signal. And it's pointing you towards something you were designed for that your production was never meant to provide. To the man who's faithful but frustrated, the framework that attached your identity to results was never the full picture. You weren't failing at faith. You were operating from a distorted version of it that nobody named accurately, and that gets named today. To the man who's done performing, you were right to be tired. Not tired of the responsibility, but tired of the framework that made the responsibility the definition of who you are. There's an original design underneath everything that was layered on top of you, and this season is going to uncover it. Now, I want every man listening to hear this clearly. Your value is not in your provision. Your worth is not in your protection. Your identity is not in your production. I know the street said otherwise. I know the culture says otherwise. And I know sometimes even the church said otherwise. But the Hebrew text, the original language, the original context, what God actually said before anything else got to it, says something completely different. You are Shalem, God's living royal representative, placed here with authority and assignment before you ever earned anything. And you are a zakar, designed to remember that and execute from it. Not as a strategy for better results, but as the ground you stand on regardless of results. That is the original design, and that is what this season is going to recover. Season 1, Before the Distortion. It's going to be 9 episodes built as a complete formation journey. Every episode is going to move through 3 movements: revelation, recognition, and realignment. Revelation is where you encounter something true about who God said you were before the distortion. This is not about information. What it's about is a revelation of identity. something that doesn't feel like you're learning something new as much as it feels like something you're remembering. Recognition. This is where you're going to see yourself clearly, not with condemnation, but with clarity. And the gap between who God said you were and who the distortion shaped you to be, that gap is not shame. That gap is an invitation. Lastly, realignment. This is where you leave with a new place to stand. Not a to-do list, not a new performance standard, but a new posture. And I want you to understand, this is beyond self-improvement. This is formation, the kind that changes what you are, not just what you do. Now, before I close, I want to speak directly to the woman listening, because you know this man. He provides, he shows up, he's faithful, and somehow he's still far away. He's tired in a way he can't even explain, and he's carrying something he won't name. He's been present in the room, but he's been absent from the relationship. And I want you to hear this clearly. He's not indifferent to you. He's not broken beyond reach. He's a man who was handed frameworks that gave him functions without a foundation. He was told what to do, but never told who he was. And a man who doesn't know who he is cannot fully show up for the people he loves most, no matter how hard he tries. Now, understanding that won't fix everything, but it might change how you see him in the moments that are the hardest. And I want you to know that this show was built with you in mind, not just as someone who loves a man in the cave, but as a woman who deserves to understand her own design, her own function, her own purpose in covenant. That conversation is coming from the Hebrew text in a way most women have never heard it before. So stay with us, because what's ahead is for you as much as it is for him. Now, before I let you go, I need to say something about next week, because today we named the foundation. We established that you are Shalem, a living royal representative of God, placed here on purpose with authority, with an assignment. And we established that you are a zakar, designed to remember that and to execute from that place. But here's what I didn't get to tell you today. What did that actually look like before the distortion got to it? Before the fall changed the operating system? What did God actually design when he said, "Let us make man"? That's episode 2, the original design. We go back to the beginning, before anything got distorted, before anything got reduced, before anything got replaced. And I promise you, what God actually said is bigger than what you've been told. It's more specific than what you've heard, and it's more freeing than anything the world, the culture, or the church handed you. Episode 2 drops next week, and you need to be there. I want you to subscribe right now on whatever platform you're on. And if today opened up something, if something landed and you want to keep going or going deeper, I want you to go to manifesttheman.com and book a cave conversation. 30 minutes, free, no pressure. Just a real conversation about where you are and what the design says you were built for. Now, I want to leave you with this. God formed you. He breathed into you. He placed you. Before you ever performed a thing, before you ever proved anything to anyone, before the streets had an opinion, before the church handed you a role, you are his image, and you are his representative. You were zakar before the world told you what a man was supposed to be, and you still are. I want you to understand that the cave is not punishment. The cave is the point. I'm Powell, and this is Conversations from the Cave, Season 1, Before the Distortion, Episode 1, The Cave is the Point. I'll see you next week.